Hello, everyone. This is Dory Clark, and we're here with our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. And our guest this week is Richard Bistrong. He is the CEO of Frontline Anti Bribery. And Richard, my first question for you is we're old friends. Tell the audience a little bit more about how we came to be connected because it is an integral part of your story.
Well, thank you, Dory. It's a pleasure to join you here today. And how we connected is also, I can say now it's a pleasure to talk about, but it was while I was sitting in federal prison in 2012, serving 14 and a half months for violating US foreign anti bribery laws, and picked up Reinventing You. And that book, Dory, and your work really took me from despair to hope in giving me an appreciation that my experience as a international sales executive that ran afoul of US criminal law, that it might actually provide for a learning moment or a teachable moment for other people who continue to face, 15 years later, the same kinds of risks and forces that I faced. So thank you again for that transformational book, which really turned around, my whole thought process about what I would do when I got out of prison.
Yeah, Richard, thank you so much. So, I was interested in talking with you today about this because, as we think about diversity issues writ large, one of the issues that comes up is people who have a prison record, and they are some of the folks that have among the hardest time getting jobs, even if they are people who can do a good job, who are highly motivated, and who may be having a lot to contribute, but there are a lot of structural barriers to that. Now, your strategy, I think, is especially interesting because you decided to lean in to the fact that you had been in prison. And in fact, I will quote you to yourself on your LinkedIn profile. You actually say, "My journey started as a successful international sales vice president of a global corporation and ended with my pleading guilty to violating the FCPA and UK trade offenses. As part of my cooperation agreements, I worked in an undercover capacity with the FBI and City of London Police before serving a 14-month federal prison term, returning home in 2013." Now, this is something that probably, a lot of people's first impulse would be like, geez, don't talk about that. Like, can't we just like sweep that under the rug? So obviously you took the opposite tack here. Why is this something that you talk about? And how have you leveraged this in the work that you do?
Well, I continue to talk about it for a couple of reasons. Number one is there's still $3 trillion of bribery and corruption being siphoned off the global financial system. So this stubborn issue of bribery and corruption still impacts our global economies, and it impacts societies and good governance and human development, economic development. So what I thought is that the challenge is still there, and I went through this crucible, made the wrong decisions due to no one's fault but my own. But Dory, it was avoidable, right? And what I didn't appreciate is that, cheating is always a choice, and there are always workable paths to success other than violating the law. But some of these behavioral forces on our decision making are quite powerful. And while there are great law firms and forensic firms and investigatory firms that are all there to help with anti-bribery ethics and compliance, that what I saw when I got out of prison is no one was talking about what is it actually like out there? What is it like to be faced with aggressive commercial success in some high risk and volatile parts of the world? So, leading back on Reinventing You and some of the things that you talked about is, with full transparency, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I shared that experience openly, with humility and transparency, and just said, if this can help tip your teams to the right side of ethical decision making, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to work with your teams to see if we can help people that face these same commercial pressures to succeed and the pressure to comply, and how we can help them.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Richard. And I mean, your client roster these days is very impressive. You've worked with everybody from Volkswagen to Novartis, Anheuser-Busch, Airbus, Kraft Heinz, Microsoft, lots of other Fortune 100 companies and trade groups. And I have to imagine that it's fairly rare for them to have someone with your experience who's not just telling them, do this, don't do that, but also sharing your experience as someone who felt cosseted by some of these pressures directly. I'm curious. Maybe you can share just a few top tips. If you are an organization, I know this is something you've written about for a variety of high-profile publications. If you're an organization that wants to, be more mindful about how to create an ethical culture so that people in your position, what used to be, your position back when you were an executive, feel pressure to do unethical things. What are some of the safeguards that can be put into place, or what can be done culturally to help ensure that fewer people end up making the wrong decisions?
Well, one part of it is proactive outreach. And this is something that a common friend and colleague of ours, Amy Edmondson, talks about in her book, The Fearless Organization, is don't let dangerous silence come between you and your commercial teams. And if they're not calling you for help and support and to share that, hey, guess what? You know what? I'm struggling to understand how I'm supposed to succeed without sacrificing integrity. If they're not calling you when they should be calling you, or especially because they're not calling you, maybe it's time to call them. And Amy's got a great playbook for just ask some open-ended questions. How are things going? How can we help you? What are some of the risks that you're facing in your work? And the more we're having this proactive outreach and feedback loop when there's not a crisis at hand, the more likelihood that people will reach out and say, you know what, I've got a great support team back at the home office that care about my success and safety. I'm facing a stubborn ethical dilemma here. Let me call them for help, because I know that I'm not here alone, even though I might be alone, to untangle these competing corporate objectives.
Yeah, that's a great point. We're here with Richard Bistrong. He is the CEO of Frontline Anti Bribery. And this is Dory Clark. We're here with our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better, where we're talking about diversity issues in the workplace. Today's topic is from corruption and even serving time in jail to compliance. So, Richard, I'm curious. As you think back on your experience serving time in prison, the people that you got to know, you decided to carve an entrepreneurial path for yourself, which in some ways, of course, as with any entrepreneurial journey, is hard because you have to gin up business and create clients. But it's also in some ways easier because you don't have to answer to someone who might be looking at your resume and saying tisk tisk. What did you see among people that you were serving time with? Where did they end up? What challenges did they face? And what advice would you have for other people who are in a situation similar to yours, that they may be, talented white collar professionals with great experience, but if they have what someone considered to be this black mark on their resume, what would you suggest that they do afterwards?
So I think there are a few things. Number one, it's all about transparency. So, accepting responsibility for what you did, owning it is critical, right? Don't try any ethical spinning exercises. In fact, Dory, when I'm working with my clients, the first thing I share is, this is on me. This is about personal accountability, personal responsibility, and again, cheating is always a choice. So I think that there can sometimes be a little bit of a temptation to try to say, "Whoa, it was, I was paid to succeed," or I was working in high risk parts of the world, like it wasn't even illegal where I was. Like that's not going to work. You really have to think and take your time and take ownership of it. and maybe even to write some pieces, whether it's your own blog or guest write, and to share that experience, so that when it comes time to maybe sit down with a potential employer, like it's all out there, and you haven't made any attempt to hide what happened. You can say, this is what happened. It doesn't define me, and it doesn't necessarily define my future, but I don't also want to make any effort to hide or distract from what happened. And I think that's when a potential employer might say, you know what, let's take a look at this. And, given your whole career history, maybe there is a fit here.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Richard. And certainly in terms of the work that I do around branding and advising around that, I am a big believer in the adage that, as they say, the cover up is worse than the crime. People would really worry in any instance if they feel like something is being hidden from them, especially a potential employer. And so being straight up, being forthright about it might feel very emotionally risky, but it is the right move, because otherwise, if something is discovered later, then that becomes the issue rather than, the original prison record. It's, oh, well, why didn't you tell me? What are you hiding? What else are you hiding? And you don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
And, we're in a time where it's a tight labor market. So for someone who does have a criminal conviction, whatever the nature of that might be, and I think we're excluding, violent crimes and some other different type of activities that would naturally exclude or make it very difficult for someone to re-enter the workforce. But I think for the wider scope of criminal conduct, a lot of organizations now facing a tight labor market might say, you know what, this check the box, you have a criminal conviction, you're in the out pile. Now is a good time to think about reapproaching the workforce. I don't think the environment that we're in now is more prone toward reconsidering people with criminal convictions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Richard. So I want to move on to another issue that you've spoken about very openly and recently wrote about for another high-profile publication. I will again. You have a great writings that you have done, so I will quote you again. You start your piece by saying, "Earlier in my career, I was sitting in a management meeting with my supervisor and peers. During a roundtable discussion on sales strategies, my boss asked for my opinion, but I failed to respond. Why? Because I was sleeping and in the throes of a near fatal drug addiction, which continued for 2 more years. First of all, oh my goodness, it's good. It's good that you are much better and very healthy now. But talk to us about this and what you have taken from this experience and why you are writing and sharing about that as well."
Well, I think, like, corruption in our global financial systems, addiction issues in the workplace is also a very persistent and stubborn issue. And Dory, going, and doing the research for that Fast Company article, there are some troubling statistics. Number one, our issue with addiction and alcoholism on a global basis is not subsiding, but there's some forces out there that are really, pushing us in the wrong direction, and that much of it is going untreated now. In this remote and hybrid environment, we're not getting the type of in-person treatment that we were used to, when I went through my own, addiction crucible. And the other part of it is, and this is a little bit of a surprising finding in the research, is that we're making more friends at work these days. So it's much more likely that someone's maybe addiction issues that were before sort of hidden behind a Zoom or Teams meeting when you weren't online, they might become more apparent now that we're returning to the office. And some of the first people that might notice that something's not right here, it doesn't have to be as obvious as sleeping in a meeting, might be your work friends. So now what do you do when you think you have a work friend that might have a substance abuse problem? This is not an easy issue to deal with in the workplace.
Well, that's absolutely right. And I think you're right. This is a bit of a liminal moment, Richard, because as we do spend more time in a hybrid environment or actually, coming back to work and not just being on a Zoom screen, you're right. People might be picking up more cues, might be aware that something is going on. And so that begs the question. Please tell us if we think that we have a colleague who may have a substance abuse problem, understanding, of course, you are not a doctor, et cetera, et cetera. But as someone who has been on the other side of this equation, what did you learn from your own experience? What do you wish that your colleagues would have done, or what did they do successfully? And what advice can we carry with us so that if we come across a friend or colleague at work who is experiencing this, we can be a little bit more attuned?
Well, once you've double checked yourself for what might be a bias or an experience with a family member that might sort of influence the lens at which you're looking at your workplace friend. So once you've double checked that, no, this isn't just, working late and being sleepy, or, being jittery because you've had too much coffee. There's an issue here. You have to make what is going to be a critical decision. Do you want to maintain your friendship and strengthen your friendship? Or do you want to even subtly confront the person with the observed behaviors? Not the what you might speculate, but what you've observed. Because Dory, once you make that initial approach to that person, your friendship won't be the same. And that's not to say that way down the line, after the person got the right treatment and got on a path of recovery, that they might not return to you and say, thank you for confronting me, so many years ago. I know that I didn't react in a way that was very, helpful to our friendship, but I appreciate what you did now. So you're not going to grow your friendship. You're not going to, don't expect to make a greater friend by confronting them. But what you will do is maybe push them or make them aware that you know what might be going on, that you're there to help, that you're there to support. And again, your friendship may take a significant hit, but the most important thing is that person's welfare, and to make sure that they're not putting anyone else in harm's way. So you really, it comes down to, I think, parking the friendship and doing the right thing. That's not what my colleagues did, and I wish they did, but sooner or later I got the help that I needed and thanked a few people years later.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Richard, that you raised, because it seems so so unfortunate that the reward for being helpful to the long-term health and well-being of your friend is essentially having your friend be really, really angry with you. But we need to brace ourselves that may be the reality, and recognize that sometimes if you really want to help the person, that's just the blow that you have to endure in the short term to try to do what's right. So I think that's a really important point, just so people are not caught off guard in terms of the response that they're probably going to receive. So great point there. So Richard, overall, as you think, if we gave you the proverbial magic wand, when you think about having a employment environment, having a company that would be more supportive of and welcoming to people who may be in situations that you could be considered a stigmatized group, someone who had served time in prison or had a criminal record, or somebody who perhaps had a past drug or alcohol addiction. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, you're exactly right. We're in a tight labor market, which, thank you, economics, does make it more likely that companies might be considering hiring, more out of the box candidates here. But if we genuinely wanted to have an inclusive work environment that made people feel welcome for their talents, even if they had these challenges in the past, what would you suggest?
I mean, I think, it starts with human resources, because they're going to set the tone for how this person, going back to Reinventing You, the good, the bad, the ugly, is accepted from a cultural perspective in the organization. So I think human resources really needs to think about how they're going to message that individual, during the onboarding process. And what I've seen some organizations do is to share, look, you've made it clear to us, you've been honest with us, you've even written about your experience, and we've onboarded you. We think you're great talent, you're going to be a great fit in the organization. Now, who you might decide to share this with as you start to build work friendships, if you want to tell them about your past, if you want to be proactive about it, that's up to you. So we're protecting your confidentiality from our perspective, but we're not going to blast it over the PA system. By the way, welcome Johnny or Jill, who hears about their past. But on the other hand, we want to leave that to you. And Dory, I shared with you, I've been doing some international traveling lately, and someone approached me after one of my talks and said, by the way, I want you to know that, I've been to prison. And he shared with me, I'm sharing this with you in confidence, but, my organization knows about it. And like that really meant so much to me, that he felt comfortable to share it, but that also people in his organization knew about it. So I think there's a much more inclusive environment now, but I think we need to leave some of this up to the discretion of the individual, once they make it past HR.
Great advice, Richard. Thank you so much. This is Dory Clark, and this is our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. If you want to learn more, stay tuned, get updates, you can go to doryclark.com, sign up, get a free self-assessment, and you will get reminders about our shows. And if you want to learn more about our guest, his name is Richard Bistrong. He is the CEO of Frontline Anti Bribery. You can check him out at richardbistrong.com. Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dory. Thanks, everyone.
Take care and see you next week.